Jean Baudrillard's The Transparency of Evil, 1990, represents one of his most provocative and enigmatic contributions to contemporary philosophy and cultural theory. In this work, Baudrillard delves into the changing nature of morality, evil, and transgression in late modernity, suggesting that the traditional categories of good and evil are increasingly unstable, transparent, and even hollow. The book is written in a fragmented, aphoristic style, reflecting the complexity and paradoxical nature of its subject matter, and it occupies a critical place in postmodern thought, especially in Baudrillard's exploration of hyperreality, simulation, and the cultural logic of late capitalism. At the heart of the transparency of evil is the notion that evil no longer exists as a hidden mysterious force opposed to good, as it did in traditional moral frameworks. Instead, evil has become transparent, fully exposed, and integrated into the fabric of everyday life. In other words, what was once transgressive or morally deviant has become normalized, visible, and pervasive. The title itself suggests that evil is no longer a secret that needs to be discovered or resisted. It is fully present, yet it is paradoxically impotent because its visibility strips it of its traditional power to shock or morally engage. Evil is now a spectacle, and its transparency renders moral judgment increasingly difficult or meaningless. Baudrillard elaborates on this idea by examining the disappearance of clear moral dichotomies. In earlier societies, he argues, good and evil were oppositional, mutually reinforcing concepts. The presence of evil defined the boundaries of good, and vice versa. However, in contemporary culture, these oppositions dissolve. Transgression has been absorbed into everyday life, and acts that once would have been shocking or morally reprehensible are now banal or even celebrated. In this context, evil loses its density, becoming transparent, in the sense that it no longer carries moral weight. It is rendered visible, but it is also neutralized. There is no longer an outside to morality against which evil can be measured. Instead, moral categories themselves have become fluid and performative. A central mechanism in this process is what Baudrillard calls simulation, a concept he develops in earlier works like simulacra and simulation. In the context of the transparency of evil, simulation operates by reproducing and circulating transgressive acts in such a way that they become detached from their original moral or social significance. Acts of violence, perversity, or deviance are no longer confined to particular contexts. They are endlessly reproduced in media, art, advertising, and everyday social interactions. As these acts circulate, they lose their immediacy and intensity, becoming part of a hyper-real landscape where distinctions between the moral and the immoral are blurred. This process renders evil transparent because it is everywhere and nowhere at once, visible but stripped of its ethical or existential force. Baudrillard further emphasizes the role of seduction in contemporary society as a force that complicates moral evaluation. Seduction is no longer simply a matter of desire or eroticism. It operates at the level of signs, images, and cultural codes. Modern evil often masquerades as seduction. It is attractive, playful, and aesthetically compelling, which makes it difficult to confront or condemn. Violence, cruelty, or degradation can be mediated through entertainment, fashion, or media spectacle, and in doing so, they acquire a form of aesthetic transparency. This means that acts traditionally deemed evil can be integrated into cultural life not only without moral challenge, but also with fascination or admiration. Evil becomes a game of appearances, an arena in which transgression is experienced aesthetically rather than ethically. Another important theme in the transparency of evil is the collapse of depth and authenticity. Baudrillard argues that contemporary culture is obsessed with surfaces, appearances, and signs, leaving little room for hidden motives or profound moral reflection. Evil, once associated with mystery, secrecy, and subterranean force, now manifests on the surface, fully exposed and stripped of depth. This transparency creates a paradoxical effect. Evil is omnipresent, yet it is impotent precisely because it is fully revealed. Without the tension of secrecy or the shock of the forbidden, evil no longer commands attention in the way it once did. Its impact is neutralized, and society becomes desensitized to its presence. Baudrillard also examines the relationship between evil and power in the late capitalist context. Traditional conceptions of evil were often linked to the exercise of power, domination, or authoritarian control. In contemporary society, power itself becomes diffuse and decentered, distributed across networks, media, and consumption practices. Evil likewise is dispersed, appearing in fragmentary, decentralized forms rather than as a coherent, organized force. This dispersion reinforces its transparency. Evil is everywhere, yet it cannot be confronted as a distinct entity. The result is a cultural landscape in which moral clarity is impossible, and transgression is rendered both mundane and performative. The work also explores the ethical implications of this transparency. If evil is omnipresent, aestheticized, and neutralized, what is the role of moral responsibility? Baudrillard suggests that traditional ethical frameworks are inadequate for contemporary conditions. In a world of transparency, moral judgments become performative gestures rather than engagements with substantive ethical realities. Individuals are confronted with a proliferation of signs, images, and acts that simulate evil without invoking genuine ethical response. The challenge of contemporary ethics, then, is to recognize the subtle interplay between visibility, power, and transgression, and to navigate a world in which moral categories are increasingly unstable. The transparency of evil also engages with broader philosophical and cultural themes, including nihilism, postmodernism, and the end of transcendence. By rendering evil transparent and banal, contemporary culture undermines the existential significance of morality. There is no longer a metaphysical or transcendental dimension to evil. It is reduced to a surface phenomenon, mediated by signs and images. This reduction has profound implications for politics, law, and social life, as traditional mechanisms for regulating and confronting evil, such as legal punishment, moral exhortation, or religious condemnation, become less effective in a society saturated with simulation. Throughout the text, Baudrillard employs a distinctive style that mixes philosophical reflection, cultural critique, and literary experimentation. His aphoristic, fragmented approach mirrors the themes he explores: a world in which coherence, depth, and traditional moral frameworks have disintegrated. This style challenges readers to confront the complexity and ambiguity of contemporary evil directly, rather than seeking tidy definitions or prescriptive solutions. It reflects his belief that the transparency of evil cannot be captured by conventional categories or linear narratives. In conclusion, Jean Baudrillard's The Transparency of Evil presents a radical reassessment of morality, transgression, and cultural life in late modernity. By emphasizing the transparency, omnipresence, and aestheticization of evil, Baudrillard challenges traditional ethical frameworks and reveals the instability of moral categories in contemporary society. Evil is no longer hidden or forbidden. It is visible, pervasive, and neutralized, a product of simulation and the play of signs. The book's fragmented style mirrors this condition, forcing readers to confront the paradoxical and unsettling nature of a world in which evil is everywhere, yet impotent, seductive, yet morally vacuous. Ultimately, The Transparency of Evil is a meditation on the ethical, cultural, and philosophical consequences of living in a society where appearances dominate, transgression is banalized, and moral clarity dissolves into transparency.